The lecture hall of the Galactic Academy was a grand place filled with rows of shining metal seats and glowing panels. Dozens of alien cadets sat inside, their different eyes and strange faces all pointed toward the stage. At the center, an old alien professor stood tall, his scales dark green, his sharp voice echoing through the hall. He was speaking about the subject of fear, a topic that fascinated young cadets from across the stars. "Fear is weakness," the professor declared with confidence. His claws tapped against the screen behind him, showing images of prey animals from many worlds. "Fear slows the body, it clouds the mind, it turns strong creatures into shaking shells," he said. The alien cadets chuckled, their laughter rolling across the room. To them, fear was something to mock, something only weak species carried inside. As the professor spoke, his screen shifted, and the image of a human appeared. The figure looked small compared to other species, with no claws, no scales, no armored skin. "Here is one of the most curious examples," the professor continued. "Humans, fragile, soft, from a death world, but still trapped by fear like any animal," he mocked. Some of the cadets hissed and laughed, calling humans prey walkers and fragile bones. They believed this lecture was entertainment as much as education. At the back of the room, one human cadet sat silently. His name was not important to them, for they thought humans had no place in the higher ranks of galactic science. He wore the same academy uniform, but his calm face and steady eyes made him stand out. While others laughed, he listened carefully, his hands folded on the desk, his mind sharp. Inside him, there was no shame, only patience. The professor walked back and forth, his tail moving behind him. "Fear is a cage, it is what separates prey from predator," he said. "To live above fear is to dominate, to command, to be free." His voice grew louder, his words sharper. The cadets nodded, their eyes wide with belief. They wanted to see themselves as masters of courage, free of weakness, but the human cadet raised his head slowly. His calm voice cut through the noise of the lecture hall. "Professor," he said, "do you want me to show you?" The entire hall froze. The sound of laughter stopped in an instant. Every alien eye turned toward the human, shocked by his boldness. Even the professor stopped walking, his tail going still. The silence grew heavy. No one expected a human to speak, not in this way. The professor narrowed his eyes, staring down at the lone cadet. "Show me," he repeated slowly, as if the words were strange to his tongue. "What could you possibly demonstrate, human?" The alien cadets began to whisper to each other. Some sneered, saying it was arrogance. Others smirked, waiting for the human to humiliate himself. But the human cadet did not flinch. He stood from his seat, his steps calm, steady, deliberate. His eyes never left the professor, his face unreadable. "You call fear a cage," he said, his voice firm, "but you do not understand it." The professor tilted his head, curious despite himself. The alien cadets leaned forward, their laughter fading into unease. The human raised his hand slowly. "Fear is not weakness," he continued. "Fear is survival. Fear is power. Fear is the reason we are still alive." The words carried across the room like thunder. For a moment, the aliens could not laugh, could not whisper. They felt something in his tone, something that made their spines tingle. The professor scoffed, but there was tension in his voice. "Do you claim that fear makes you strong?" The human gave a small smile, one that was calm yet unsettling. "Yes," he answered simply, "and I can prove it." The room seemed smaller now, the air thick. The cadets shifted in their seats, their claws tapping nervously against the desks. Something about the human's presence felt different. He was not shouting, he was not threatening, but every word carried weight. It was as if the air itself listened. The professor tried to laugh, but his voice faltered. "What proof can a human give us about strength?" he demanded. The cadets leaned closer, caught between disbelief and curiosity. They had seen humans mocked in stories, but never like this, never standing tall in defiance. The human raised his hand higher, his voice calm and sharp. "Do you want a demonstration?" he repeated. The words echoed, filling the hall with a strange energy. The laughter was gone, replaced by silence. The professor stared, his pride clashing with the chill running through him. The cadets sat frozen, their hearts beating faster. Even those who mocked humans now felt something they could not name. The silence stretched long, The lecture on fear had stopped cold. Every alien in the room knew that something was about to change, and it began with the raised hand of one human. The professor's eyes narrowed, his scaled brow furrowing as he studied the human cadet. The hall was silent, the usual whispers and giggles gone. Every alien leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity clashing with disbelief. The air felt heavy, as if the entire academy waited for the professor's answer. "Very well," the professor finally said, his voice slow and edged with doubt. "If you believe fear is not weakness, then show us. Prove your words." A ripple of noise moved through the cadets, some gasping, some laughing nervously. They wanted to see this human fail. They wanted to see arrogance crushed, but the human's face did not change. He gave a small nod, his calm eyes shining with certainty. "Then watch closely," he said, "and remember this moment." His voice carried steady, without hesitation. The professor felt his tail twitch in unease, though he tried to hide it. The human stepped forward into the open space at the center of the hall. The lights above him glowed softly, casting shadows across his frame. He looked small compared to towering alien cadets with armored hides and sharp claws, yet the way he moved made him seem larger, as if his presence stretched to fill the room. The cadets whispered again, but their voices were thinner now. One with pale skin muttered, "This is madness." Another chuckled nervously, "He will faint in fear before us." But inside, their hearts began to beat faster, though they did not understand why. The professor gestured to the control panel on the stage. "This is an academy of science," he said coldly. "We do not fight, we do not roar, we demonstrate with knowledge." He tapped a sequence, and the lights dimmed. The screen behind him flickered, showing an empty simulation grid. The human watched, calm as ever. "You want knowledge," he said. "Then you shall see knowledge your kind has ignored." He placed a small device on the ground, a simple projection cube carried in his pocket. The cadets laughed again, uneasy but mocking. "What toy is this?" one of them hissed. The human did not reply. Instead, he pressed a sequence on the cube. The grid filled with images, shapes formed in the air, shadows of great predators, jaws lined with teeth, claws longer than swords, wings that stretched across the hall. The cadets gasped, leaning back in their seats. The holograms looked too real, too close, as if they could leap from the air and tear flesh. The professor raised a brow, but tried to stay calm. "Projections only," he said dismissively. "Illusions of beasts cannot harm us." But the cadets' bodies told another story. Their tails twitched, their claws dug into seats, their hearts raced. Even illusions could stir instincts. The human walked into the center of the predators. The holographic beasts circled him, their eyes glowing red, their growls shaking the room. To the aliens, it seemed madness. No one walked willingly into the jaws of monsters, but the human did. Calm, steady, his steps slow and sure. The cadets stared, unable to look away. One whispered, "Why does he not tremble?" Another whispered, "Why does he look so calm?" They expected shaking hands, heavy breaths, screams. Instead, the human stood tall, his chest rising slowly, his eyes sharp. His body showed no weakness, only focus. The professor's smirk began to fade. Something about this sight unsettled him. He had seen cadets from predator species collapse under the same program, but here, a fragile human stood surrounded, and instead of breaking, he seemed to grow stronger. The human raised his hand once more, his voice carrying clearly. "You see fear as weakness because you never learned to master it," he said. "Fear is not a chain. It is a blade." His words sank into the hall. The cadets felt them in their bones. Though they did not want to admit it, the predators in the simulation lunged forward, their roars shaking the walls. Every alien in the room gasped, some rising from their seats in alarm, but the human did not move back. He stepped forward, his body flowing with precision. The beast crashed around him, but he turned, dodged, and struck with motions born not of strength but of focus. Each time the jaws snapped near, the human moved at the last second. Each time the claws swept close, he twisted away. The room held its breath. The cadets felt their own fear rise, even though they were only watching, but the human's fear did not crush him. It sharpened him. The professor stared, his voice caught in his throat. He had intended to humiliate the human, but now he watched with a growing unease. Perhaps he had made a mistake. Perhaps this demonstration would not end the way he imagined. The simulation roared on, the predators closing in, the humans stood. But unbroken, his voice echoing again. "This is fear," he said, "not weakness, but power." The cadets shivered, for the truth of his words began to take root inside them, and the hall, once filled with laughter, now held only silence and pounding hearts. The predators circled closer, their holographic jaws snapping, their roars echoing through the great hall. The alien cadets leaned forward, their claws gripping the edges of their seats, their voices silenced by the sight before them. What was meant to humiliate the human now gripped their attention in ways they never expected. The professor stood frozen, trying to hide the unease growing in his chest. The human cadet did not flinch. Instead, he began to speak in a calm and steady tone, his voice carrying through the storm of growls. "On Earth," he said, "we live among predators like these." Images flickered behind him, lions with golden manes, wolves with eyes burning in the night, sharks cutting through the deep ocean with endless hunger. The aliens shivered, their instincts tightening, because even holograms made their spines crawl. "But fear," the human continued, "is not the voice of weakness. It is the voice that whispers warnings. It is the signal that sharpens the mind. It is the fire that tells you to fight, to survive." He stepped between the snapping jaws of a massive beast, its teeth nearly closing on him. At the last moment he rolled, smooth and controlled, rising to his feet without panic. The cadets gasped as if they too felt the breath of that predator on their necks. The professor's tail lashed in irritation, but his eyes could not leave the scene. This was not a performance, not a trick. It was something deeper, something raw. The cadets had watched warriors of predator species collapse under the same program, trembling until the holograms were shut off. But here a human walked among them as if he belonged. The holographic wolves closed in, their glowing eyes locked on the human. He waited until the last second, then clapped his hands sharply. The sound triggered the program and the wolves pounced, their bodies crashing forward. The audience cried out, but the human spun sideways, sliding low, his arms snapping outward in perfect timing. The beasts passed him by, slamming into the ground and scattering like shadows. The cadets stared, some rising from their seats. One whispered, "Impossible." Another muttered, "He moves like he knows the attack before it comes." And the truth was clear. He was not avoiding fear, he was using it. The edge of danger sharpened his movements, guided his instincts, pushed his body faster than thought. The human's voice echoed again, louder now. "Fear is the oldest teacher of my kind," he said. "From fire in the dark, from predators in the night, from storms and war, fear told us what must be done." The images shifted again, showing not beasts, but humans. Hunters crouched in the snow, warriors standing with spears, explorers in deep caves, soldiers in burning fields. Each face was filled not with weakness but with iron will. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, their chests tight. Some felt a strange sensation. They felt fear but not their own. They felt the human's fear alive in his words, sharp and burning, and instead of crushing him, it raised him higher. The professor's voice finally cracked. "Enough," he snapped, his claws tapping nervously against the console. But the human ignored him. He turned slowly toward the audience, his calm eyes sweeping across alien faces. "Do you know what true fear is?" he asked quietly. The question sent a shiver through the hall. "True fear is not being hunted," he said. "It is knowing you may fall, and standing anyway." The holograms shifted again, darker now. The predators grew larger, their shadows longer, their roars louder. Some cadets flinched, their bodies tensing. The air grew heavy, and even though they knew it was only a program, their instincts screamed at them to run. But the human only smiled faintly. He stepped forward, facing the monsters head-on. "This is fear," he said, "and this is how we turn it into strength." He clenched his fists, his eyes glowing with determination, and as the predators lunged once more, the human leapt into them without hesitation. The cadets gasped in one voice, their hearts pounding. The professor stood still, his pride burning, but deep inside he felt something colder. For the first time he wondered if perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about humans. The hall darkened until only the glowing eyes of the predators lit the space. The holograms grew larger, their claws scraping across the floor as if they were real, their roars vibrating through every seat. The alien cadets could feel the sound inside their chests, a low thunder that made their scales and fur bristle. For the first time, many of them wished the simulation would end. But the human walked calmly among the illusions. His footsteps echoed soft against the metal floor, steady, unshaken. He turned slowly, his eyes following each beast, as if he had known their paths long before they appeared. The cadets whispered nervously, their voices sharp with unease. "He should collapse by now," one muttered. "No prey can stand in the middle of such predators." But the human did not collapse. He grew sharper, his body moving with a strange rhythm. The largest predator, a beast with jaws like twin blades, lunged toward him. The audience gasped. Some even rose to their feet in alarm. The human dropped low, spinning across the floor, and the beast's jaws closed on empty air. The moment was so fast, so precise, it looked less like survival and more like mastery. The cadets' hearts pounded, not only from fear, but from something else, something close to respect. The human's voice rang out again, calm yet filled with power. "You believe fear is weakness," he said, "but you feel it now, don't you?" The cadets froze, their eyes darting, their bodies tense. His words cut deep because they knew he was right. The simulation that was meant to test him was now testing them, the professor hissed, his tail lashing the ground. "This proves nothing," he snapped, his voice louder than before, almost desperate, but his eyes betrayed him, because he too felt the cold rush of fear crawling along his scales. He told himself it was only the holograms, but the truth whispered louder. The human's presence was the real source. The human turned toward the professor, his gaze steady. "You speak of fear as chains," he said, "but chains break when you know how to hold them." Then he raised his hand, pressing the projection cube again. The predators changed, their roars deeper, their bodies darker, their forms sharper. Now they looked less like animals and more like nightmares born from the mind. The cadets recoiled, their instincts screaming. One alien muttered under his breath, "I can't breathe." Another gripped his seat, claws scratching deep grooves into the metal. Yet the human stepped forward without pause. The beasts lunged at him from every side, their shadows wrapping him in darkness. The audience expected screams, blood, collapse. Instead, the human moved faster, his steps blending with the rhythm of the attack. Every dodge, every roll, every strike looked like a dance between life and death. And every second he survived, his power grew stronger in their eyes. The cadets whispered in panic, their voices no longer mocking. "This isn't possible," one said. "He should be crushed by fear." "No," another answered quietly, their eyes locked on the human. "He is feeding on it." The professor's scales felt cold, his pride weakening with every passing second. He tried to convince himself it was only an illusion. Cyan, only a trick. But then he looked at his cadets, and he saw their wide eyes, their trembling hands, their shallow breaths. They were not facing the predators directly, and yet they were breaking. The human was inside the storm, and he was unbroken. The predators circled again, preparing for another strike. The human raised his head, his voice calm and sharp like a blade. "This is fear when it rules you," he said, pointing toward the aliens in their seats. Then he clenched his fist, his eyes glowing with intensity. "And this is fear when you rule it." The beast lunged again, but this time the human did not dodge. He stepped forward into the jaws of the largest, his figure swallowed by its shadow. The cadets cried out, their voices echoing in terror, and then the shadow burst apart, scattering into sparks, the beast dissolving into nothingness. The human emerged from the fading light, standing tall, his chest steady, his eyes burning. The hall went silent, not with laughter, not with doubt, but with raw fear and awe. For the first time, every alien cadet saw fear not as weakness, but as a force that could reshape destiny. And in that silence, they began to realize the truth. The human had just changed the meaning of fear forever. The sparks of the shattered beast faded, leaving the hall in heavy silence. The cadets stared wide-eyed, their hearts pounding, their claws digging into their seats. What they had just seen broke every rule they had been taught. A fragile human had walked into the jaws of fear and turned it into ashes. But the demonstration was not over. The human raised the cube again, his fingers moving with steady control. The predators shifted, their forms growing darker, their movements faster, their roars louder. Now they were not simple beasts, they were the twisted nightmares of every species in the room. Some cadets hissed, others covered their eyes. One even trembled so badly his chair rattled against the floor. The professor tried to bark an order. "Enough! End this now!" But his voice cracked, and the sound of it only revealed his own fear. The cadets looked at him with shock. They had never heard their teacher's voice tremble. Yet the human ignored him, his focus unbroken. The predators lunged again, this time in coordinated strikes. The human did not simply dodge. He began to move with strategy. His feet traced patterns on the floor, his steps forming traps. He let one beast overextend, then spun aside, its body crashing into another. The cadets gasped as the illusions collided, falling in sparks. It was no longer survival. It was control. The human's voice rang clear, echoing over the chaos. "You think fear blinds," he said, "but fear sharpens. It teaches you to see what others miss." He ducked beneath a swipe, rolled forward and slammed his hand into the cube again. New holograms spawned. Human soldiers, human hunters, human explorers. They stood beside him, illusions of his ancestors, their faces hard with fire. The cadets leaned back, overwhelmed, their minds unable to grasp the image. One whispered, "He is not alone." And for a moment it felt true. The predators charged the line of humans, but the illusions fought back. Spears struck, blades flashed, guns fired. The beasts shrieked and fell into sparks one by one. The human cadet stood at the center, his body moving as if guided by the spirits of all who came before. The aliens felt their bodies shiver, their instincts screaming that this was wrong. This was not how prey behaved. Prey ran, prey begged, prey hid. But the human did none of those things. Instead, he turned fear into a weapon, using it as fuel, using it as fire. The professor's tail twitched wildly, his pride struggling against the truth behind. For his eyes, he wanted to deny it, but his chest felt heavy, his mind clouded with doubt. This was not weakness, it was strength born from something deeper, something the galaxy had never respected and now could no longer ignore. Another wave of predators filled the hall, faster, stronger, their jaws wide. The cadets cried out, some covering their ears from the sound, but the human did not step back. He moved forward, his body flowing with precision, his strikes timed perfectly. Each beast that lunged became a victim of its own momentum. Each roar was silenced by a counterattack that seemed impossibly fast. The cadets could not believe what they were seeing. One muttered, "He is fighting fear itself." Another whispered, "He is teaching us." And that was the truth. This was no simple demonstration anymore. This was a lesson, written not in words but in survival. The human finally raised his voice above the chaos. "This is the turning point," he said. "Fear does not crush us. Fear shapes us. Fear gives us the edge to overcome the impossible." His words were fire, and every cadet felt them burn into their minds. The predators circled one last time, their roars blending into a single storm. The human clenched his fists, his eyes glowing with unshaken will. He stepped forward, facing them all, and as the beasts rushed together in one final strike, the human roared back, a sound so raw, so filled with power, that even the aliens in the audience flinched. The predator struck, only to break apart into sparks around him. The hall shook, the echoes of his roar lingering long after the illusions were gone. When the light cleared, the human stood alone in the silence. He had not only survived the simulation, he had conquered it, and the cadets who once laughed now stared with trembling respect. They had seen a truth that could never be forgotten. Humans did not fear the Aton. Dark, they became stronger because of it. The last sparks of the fallen predators faded, leaving the hall in silence so deep that even breath sounded loud. The cadets sat frozen, their claws gripping their seats, their eyes wide and unblinking. They had seen simulations before. They had seen illusions of beasts, but nothing like this, for what terrified them now was not the predators, but the humans standing calm at the center of it all. The professor shifted on the stage, his tail twitching with unease. He opened his mouth to end the program, to regain control. But before he could speak, the human pressed the cube again. The hall darkened further, shadows spilling across the walls like a living tide. And then the predators returned, but this time they did not circle the human. They turned toward the cadets in their seats, one by one, their glowing eyes locked on the aliens. The cadets gasped, some jerking back, some gripping the metal seats so hard their claws screeched. No, this isn't part of the program, one whispered, panic cracking his voice. The beasts leapt, their shadows rushing toward the rows of seats. The cadets screamed, some covering their heads, some nearly falling from their chairs. The professor barked, "Control yourselves, they are not real." But even his own voice shook, because the instinct of fear did not listen to reason, it clawed straight into the heart. The human stood calmly in the storm, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This," he said, "is fear when it owns you." The cadets felt the words as clearly as they felt the phantom claws rushing toward them. They were prey in that moment, no rank, no pride, only trembling creatures caught in the jaws of terror. One cadet, larger than the rest, tried to roar to show strength, but his voice cracked, the sound weak and pitiful. The predators rushed him, their fangs inches away, and he froze, his body locked, unable to move. The human raised his hand, and the illusion stopped an instant before the strike. The beast vanished, leaving. The cadet shaking, humiliated, his pride shattered. The human's calm voice returned, steady and sharp. "You see," he said, "when fear controls you, you are helpless, no matter your size, no matter your strength." His words rolled across the room, and the cadets lowered their eyes, their hearts pounding in shame. Then the human pressed the cube again. The predators returned, but this time they charged him, not the cadets. He moved with calm precision, his body flowing around them like water. Each time their jaws snapped, he turned it into an opening. Each time their claws swung, he twisted it into a trap. The audience watched in stunned silence, their breathing shallow. The same predators that froze them in terror were nothing but tools in his hands. "This," he said firmly, "is fear when you own it." His words shook the hall harder than the roars of the beasts. The cadets stared, unable to deny the truth any longer. Fear had crushed them, but it had lifted the human higher, and that difference was more terrifying than the predators themselves. The professor swallowed hard, his scales pale. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never expected. He feared a human, not because of their claws or fangs, but because of something invisible, something untouchable, the power to stand in fear and bend it to their will. The predators dissolved once more, the shadows fading, the hall glowing with normal light. But the cadets did not relax. They sat stiff, their bodies trembling, their minds shaken. The human turned slowly, his calm eyes sweeping across them. "You felt it," he said quietly. "You felt how fear can break you." The words were soft, but in the silence they struck harder than any roar. He stepped closer, his gaze sharp, his tone unyielding. "Remember this," he said. "The difference between you and me is not that I feel less fear. It is that I use it." The cadets lowered their heads, not in mockery now, but in respect, in submission. Even those who once laughed at humans could not meet his eyes. The professor stood frozen, unable to answer. The lecture he had commanded was gone, taken from his hands. The human had turned it into something greater, something unforgettable. The hall had become not a classroom, but a battlefield, and the victor was clear. And as the silence stretched, the cadets realized a truth that made their blood run cold. If this was only a demonstration, then what would reality be like? The hall was no longer a classroom. It was a place of silence, heavy and unshakable. The cadets who once laughed at the mention of humans now sat still, their bodies stiff, their claws digging deep grooves into their desks. No one spoke. No one dared to move. Every breath sounded loud. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in the quiet. The human cadet stood alone in the center, his chest rising slow, his eyes calm and steady. He looked small compared to the towering aliens, but in that moment he was the only giant in the room. The predators had faded, the shadows had gone, yet the fear remained, not from the simulation, but from the human himself. The professor stood frozen on the stage, his mouth half open, his voice gone. He had started the lecture with pride, mocking humans as weak prey. But now he felt something colder than shame in his chest. He felt respect mixed with fear, a truth he could not deny. He lowered his eyes, his scales pale. For the first time, the teacher bowed before the student. The cadets whispered softly, their voices thin as air. "What are they really?" one muttered. "They were supposed to be fragile," another said, his claws trembling. "No," a third answered quietly, His gaze locked on the human. They are something else, something we never understood. The human walked slowly back to his seat, his steps calm, his presence still heavy. As he passed, cadets leaned away, their bodies tense, their eyes wide. He did not gloat, he did not smile wide, he only carried himself with quiet certainty. When he reached his chair, he sat down with ease, folding his hands before him. Only then did he speak, his voice calm, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Lecture over," he said simply. The words echoed across the hall, and the cadets felt them burn into their minds. No one laughed, no one mocked, no one dared to speak against it. The professor cleared his throat, but his voice was faint. "Perhaps we misunderstood humans," he whispered. The cadets nodded slowly, unable to meet the humans' gaze. They had walked into the hall believing humans weak, fragile, laughable. They left the hall knowing something far different. Humans were the only ones who could stand in fear and turn it into fire. As the class ended, the cadets filed out quietly, their heads low, their thoughts heavy. The image of the humans standing unbroken among predators replayed again and again in their minds. Some shivered, some clenched their fists. All carried the same thought. If one human cadet could do this in a lecture, what would their kind be capable of in war? The professor remained behind, staring at the empty hall. He remembered the human's calm words, his steady eyes, his unshaken will. The galaxy had laughed at Earth, dismissed it, mocked it. But now he wondered if the galaxy had just made its greatest mistake. The human sat in silence, a small smile curling at the edge of his lips. He had not only survived the lecture, he had conquered it, and though he said no more, every alien in that room would carry his lesson forever. Fear was not weakness, fear was strength, and humans were masters of it.